Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mitali Gupta, and I'm an innovator and strategist at a startup based out of Berlin. And in addition, I'm honored to partner with the Impact Hub Network to lead this session of Impact State of Mind on behalf of Impact Hub New York Metropolitan Area. So to give you a little bit of background, Impact Hub New York Metropolitan Area is a nonprofit supporting entrepreneurs and change makers through programs designed to help impactful ideas succeed. We work across the New York Metro broadly and are a part of a global association of entrepreneurial communities in over 100 cities in across 50 countries. Impact State of Mind is a virtual series created to support innovators and connect the impact community, especially during the COVID-19 crisis. These sessions are a way for entrepreneurs to connect digitally and internationally on topics that are at the forefront of social impact today. We are so excited and honored to have Zoya Kozakov online with us today, who will be sharing her knowledge on designing a more equitable and inclusive ecosystem, especially across the innovation industries, and will also be talking about how her work is largely inspired by the UN SDGs and also contributes to them. Zoya is a product manager at Citi and also the global marketing lead at WIN, Women in Innovation, which is an organization dedicated to ensuring women's participation in leadership teams focused on the innovation industries. And Zoya will talk to us a little bit more about that. She's also a part-time faculty at Columbia University and BrainStation, a global adult learning school, and an advisor and mentor to several startups and nonprofits. So without further ado, thank you so much, Zoya, for joining us today. Totally a true privilege to have you online. So we'd love to hear a little bit about your work dedicated to gender equality. So why don't you tell us about WIN, the vision of women in innovation, and the overall goals as they relate to the SDGs?
Yeah, it's such a privilege to be here. I'm so excited to be here on behalf of WIN and talking about some of the other ways that I'm involved with innovation and SDGs. So to give a little bit of an introduction, WIN is a global nonprofit organization. The mission and the goal is to close the gender gap in innovation industries. And what we mean when we say innovation industries is innovation consulting, innovation departments and roles in Fortune 500 companies, as well as the startup ecosystem. So the startups themselves, the venture capital and other financial partners that help fuel and fund innovation. And so while women are the vehicle and we are hoping to help women advance in innovation and those identifying as women, we believe that by having a more inclusive approach to innovation, we will all have a future that is better for us because it'll be built for more of us. As far as goals and SDGs, ultimately, we've seen in the pandemic that over 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce. And that's really, really disproportionate to men, but especially worse when you break that number down by race. And so there are many reasons as to why this is happening, the unevenly distributed labor at home and the fact that the way that we consider workforce as a whole, it's not really built for everyone and women specifically. So ultimately, we are trying to create programming that helps women battle this. We are creating community and mentorship opportunities for women to be able to connect with leadership in their teams. I host a podcast that features chief innovation officers and other senior women in the space to help start and fuel this conversation. And again, I can dive in deeper on all those things if you like.
Yeah, we would love to hear a few examples of this and how you've seen firsthand that women are feeling like a little bit behind the men and how you're helping encourage them to close this gender gap and to really participate and be a part of the community.
Yeah, so even going to my first example of the unequal workforce, we've seen that when COVID broke out and we were all stuck at home, it was really the women that tend to take place of that caretaker. And so on top of doing their full-time job, they also took on the caretaking duties, both of the children as well as the home. And that is unevenly distributed and unpaid labor that they are taking on. And so how are they able to balance their jobs and how are they able to perform in their full-time roles as well as take on those childbearing and caretaking responsibilities? Again, like I mentioned, the other piece is the fact that the workforce and the way of working, the 9 to 5 or beyond the 9 to 5 that we've seen within happen take place during the pandemic, that doesn't really account for things like breastfeeding or just having to, get your children on Zoom or take care of the home. And so ultimately, this raises a lot of challenges. And again, as we saw, women simply dropped out of the workforce. So an example of what WIN can do and does for these kinds of scenarios is one, just opens up that conversation to bring women who are struggling with the same difficulties to get advice from one another, because these conversations aren't always taking place at work because they aren't socially acceptable at all times. And the other piece is showing women the other innovation roles that are out there, because I can say for myself, when I was trying to get into the innovation industry, I only thought there was one job that you can do in innovation, and that's innovation consulting, when the reality is there are many other jobs, and perhaps even starting your own company is a way to do so. And so, thinking about the SDGs and the importance of gender equality and reduced inequalities as a whole, having those conversations and addressing the issues through the programming, through the mentorship, through mentorship and learning cohorts that we host is a huge opportunity to tackle those. The other kind of really meaningful issue that we've seen come out of the pandemic is that we are seeing a lot less patents being filed by women, less published papers. We are seeing women conduct fewer clinical trials. And again, that's problematic for everyone, because ultimately the issues that we are all battling, women need to be a part of that conversation. And then I think the last piece, again, with reducing inequalities is the consideration of those with disabilities. And the same way that we are thinking about scientific advancement and considerations for persons with disabilities, ultimately WIN is creating the platform to create thought leadership and publish it. For example, we published a report called WIN Pioneers, which featured women in the space, but it was also written by women. And ultimately, as a published white paper, it enabled exposure to larger exposure, and we partnered with EY on it to really further this work. So that was a really tangible way to bring women back into contributing to advancement and thought leadership and talking about things like disabilities, as well as all the results of the pandemic in a really, really tangible way. And I think that the most amazing thing that came out of the pandemic was this global impact. We've had chapters across New York, San Francisco, and London, but having everything online, we've been able to facilitate cross collaboration worldwide and really consider what it means to tackle inequality and gender inequality specifically globally, and how that's played out in the UK versus the US, Asia, and other different continents.
That's super interesting. Thank you for sharing those examples with us.
Yeah.
You mentioned that initially when you were trying to get into the innovation industry, there was this singular lens where you saw that there were very few jobs to do as a woman in innovation. Can you talk us through a little bit more of that? What was your thought process there? Why are you passionate about this work? What path led you to innovation in the first place when you didn't even see much scope there as a woman?
Yeah, it's funny because I think that when you're just in good old school, or when I went to school, we had subjects like math and history and English, and that was about it. So I think just knowing that these jobs existed, I mean, I never took a coding class in school. That wasn't really offered to us. And so as an Israeli, I'm Israeli originally, Israeli Russian. I was in the Israeli army and in the Israeli intelligence specifically between the ages of 18 and 20, doing my mandatory service. And I was very lucky because I started my role as chief of staff for the special operations. And that was an incredible opportunity that I got to have. I had exposure to all sorts of technology, whether that was AI or blockchain or cloud computing, a long time ago, almost 10 years ago, which is crazy to think about it. And I kept on running into challenges, and a lot of those challenges I felt like were coming from a place of being misunderstood or having difficulty being acknowledged and accepted in this environment. And honestly, retrospectively, I realized it was because I was one of two women in my unit and in my space. And although I had a lot of support and mentorship from my male colleagues, there was a large kind of misunderstanding. And an example would be, consistently asking questions about the effects, the larger effects that this has. Like, if we're using all this technology, what effect is it going to have culturally, socially, environmentally, right? On all the different people and all the different groups. And so as I progressed about, in this work, I saw a huge opportunity to approach it in a different way, but I had a challenge of having that happen and having that implemented. And so I moved to the States and I decided to study strategic design and business management at Parsons School of Design. I said, if I can push this innovation strategy and design strategy along in the Army on a national security level, I can definitely do it for creative companies and impact-driven companies that I'm really, really passionate about. And as I mentioned, going to Parsons and actually being exposed to innovation a lot, kind of the angle at which we saw innovation was joining the IDEOs of this world, the RGA, Smart Design, and Frogs. And so to me, those were the roles. And I actually ended up spending a few years in digital advertising. I was at a blockchain startup, and then I did my master's at Columbia last year. And as the pandemic broke out, the offers that I had from some of those top tier innovation consultancies actually got rescinded. And that was obviously, a traumatic experience and very challenging, but it caused me to reconsider the lens of innovation. And I saw opportunity through working with women in innovation that there are opportunities to innovate and fight inequality in a lot of ways. And the industry that I ended up doing it is financial services, and specifically in my work as VP of product at Citi and working on the Google partnership, we are ultimately trying to create an experience, a digital banking experience that can reach more and more people. And so, as I started that role, I never wanted to stop doing the work that would bring more women along the path with me, and also would change the conversation around innovation and what it means to innovate. So to not just create new products or brands, but to also consider their impact on all the people. And that's been the thread throughout the intelligence, through digital advertising, through startups and marketing and now product.
That's really interesting to hear. And you have a very interesting background and trajectory as somebody in innovation. And it's a lot of value to me as well, since I'm an innovator. So would love to hear from you kind of what are the unique challenges that you were facing at this time as you were making these different moves, not just as an innovator, but also as an entrepreneur, and then also as your role in women in innovation, which I believe is a side hustle of yours. It's not a full-time job. Talk to us a little bit about that. How do you balance all that? How do you give time to it in a way that, you feel that it's really making an impact and it's really contributing?
Well, yeah, thank you for the kind words. I mean, something that we talk about at WIN all the time is something I believe I didn't even mention, is that WIN is entirely volunteer run. We have one full-time employee and she's our global executive director, but every single person is a woman in innovation on the day-to-day working in innovation. And we see incredible power to that, because for me, while I was doing my studies at Columbia and working at a startup, it enabled me to take on the side hustle, as you mentioned, the side project where I could show different impact and I could take different considerations. And then when I went and applied for my role at Citi, which was a more senior, role and step in my career, ultimately, I was able to say, look, I built up this thing and these are the impacts that it had. And so, of course, it helped me propel my career and also connect to like-minded women and get the opportunity to even be considered for my role today. But at the same time, being a woman, like I discussed earlier today, you take on a lot of unpaid labor, and that is part of the reason why we have the gender gap. And so even taking on the unpaid labor of pushing along innovation, pushing along gender equality, you could make the argument that it's actually adding to your burden, right? And so I think that's a unique challenge, because there's such value in doing nonprofit volunteer work to talk about these issues, and it's changed my life and the life of other people around me and helped other women to get into this space and change all of our futures. But it is challenging when you are doing it on top of a full-time job. And I said, I also teach at Columbia, I teach at Brain Station, so I'm working 7 days a week. And I recently launched my own nonprofit, the Kazokov Foundation, to help get more diverse minds and people into the arts and into design, because I think that's a very fundamental part of our culture and innovation. And so it becomes really challenging. But I think the upside of that, as I mentioned, outside of the things I already mentioned, is the opportunity to be an entrepreneur without being a full-time entrepreneur. I would say I'm more of an entrepreneur. And so it's given me the opportunity to just flex all sorts of different muscles and help others in the process.
Super cool. Thank you for sharing that. One of the main things we like to get out of these sessions is for people to find out more about the impact work that is going on and also get involved in the manner that they would like to. How can people support your work and how can they get involved? Talk to us a little bit more about this foundation that you just brought up. What do you need from the community that is missing today, and how can people reach out to you and connect to you?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start with WIN first, and I think that we should continue having these huge conversations about impacts in different regions. I mean, we are seeing different regions affected by the crisis in completely different ways and at different times. Everything that's going on in India is absolutely horrible and should concern us all. So to have more conversations about innovation and how we can solve these complex problems of inequality, to me, is really, really important. And the way that I think you can support that mission of mine and the mission of the organization is as you said, by getting involved. So generally, anybody can become a WIN member. We have a site, which is womeninnovation.co. And so you can become a member, join our membership hub. It's absolutely free. And you can start having these conversations and connecting with like-minded women and people who really want to make a difference. I run a podcast as a part of WIN called WIN/WIN, Women in Innovation. You can get it anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. And I think just by rating it, by sharing it, you are helping amplify the voices of the women that typically do not get a stage and tend to be behind the scenes despite how senior they are. I recently had a chief innovation officer at the NBA come on. So really, really incredible people. And I'd love to see them more and more amplified. And yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn, on Instagram. So that's kind of the WIN piece. There are also ways to get involved as a volunteer. We are doing a ton of quote unquote hiring. We have opportunities in our different chapters and on the leadership teams. So depending on how much you can get involved, there are a ton of ways to do so. As I mentioned, I launched the Kazokov Foundation, and I'm writing a book as well, which I'll bring up shortly. But the Kazokov Foundation is brand new. I'm actually just getting incorporated, and I raised the first scholarship. And so you can check it out at kazokov.co and just get in touch with me, and we can talk about all the ways that you can get involved. But like I said, the goal is to start with giving out scholarships for design and creative programs to get more people educated about design and art and be able to have access to the industries that really shape our culture. And yeah, like I said, the last thing is my book. And as a result of all these amazing conversations I've had, such as this one, I've been able to kind of start summarizing those insights and talking about innovation and how we all can be innovators in our own right and not just in our jobs, as well as analyzing what has made innovation successful in different companies and industries, so we can replicate it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that must be super helpful to the audience here. I can say I'm a part of WIN as well, and they do some great initiatives and events. That's actually how Zoya and I met as well. So definitely something that I would really encourage the audience to check out as well. What other projects, Zoya, are you working on that you would be excited to share with the audience? Is there something more you would like to talk about about your book, The Innovation Blueprint, or the role that you're doing in fintech, because that is a little bit different from all of the social impact work that you've talked about?
Yeah, so I think, I'll start by saying that a lot of these things may seem a little bit discombobulated or disconnected, but in reality, I think that we all have work to do in our own respective industries and in the innovation work that we are doing. Like I said, to me, I think the core of what I stand for and the core of what I hope people tuning in today can take away is the value of content. And, we hear about brands creating content and social media and stuff like that. When I say content, I really do mean thought leadership, but thought leadership that feels accessible to people and that can spark conversations, comfortable or uncomfortable. And so, for example, like I said, with the podcast, it actually came out of the fact when I lost the offers from the innovation consultancies as a result of the pandemic. I found myself wanting to know, am I the only one going through this? As how do I go on? I've worked so hard to get into these industry, and how am I so unfairly affected by it? Which is obviously just the least of the problems that came out of the pandemic, and how disproportionately people were affected by the pandemic, specifically people of color and other underrepresented minorities. And so with the podcast, it was important to bring those people on and amplify what they're doing. The other way that like I said, democratizing the knowledge and having these conversations is through my teaching. So a class I helped teach last fall at Columbia was ethical decision making in communications, and the importance of that was, again, to talk about the different decisions we make as communicators, as innovators, and how they impact other different groups and different aspects of the world, whether that's sustainability, whether that's the financial bottom line, or specific individuals involved, and really having that wide lens applied. And so, something I've learned through all of these different conversations and projects has been the fact that innovation at its core is about taking very complex problems, looking at all the different angles, maybe coming up with a solution, and then turning that solution on its head to again reconsider all the different groups that it affects. And I think that's why I am so passionate about the UN SDGs, specifically, like I said, gender equality and reducing inequalities, is because often when we innovate or we think that we are solving problems, we are often solving them for one group of people at the expense of another group. And so I believe that, again, it starts with having conversations around that and reconsidering how we problem solve. And so, like I said, having the opportunity to do that through a variety of communication mediums, whether it's the podcast or teaching, and now writing my book has been immensely rewarding. And then the second part of your question, which was about my work in the fintech space, I think to the point I made earlier about solving problems and the way we solve them, I think I never really connected to the financial services sector because I didn't feel like it was made for me, which I think is part of the problem. And by all standards and means, I have white privilege, I have a master's degree, and I have opportunities allowed to me that most people don't. And yet I still didn't feel like financial services and consumer banking was built with me and people like me in mind. And so when my own innovation trajectory was impacted and I had the opportunity to take on this challenge from coming from this different lens, I think it was really, really meaningful. And at Citi, working on the Google product and launching the new bank, something that we are considering is who are the people who don't currently have access to banking, and those who do, why is it not serving them, and how can we help address that? And so to me, so many people ask me at WIN, my friend groups have said, well, okay, do you think this is the long play for you? And the reality is that it is, because I've realized that inequality and poverty, as well as just, not having financial literacy and access to financial resources, is actually a huge barrier on innovation, because when people don't have access to these basic knowledge and basic resources, how can they even begin to think about innovation in their own lives or their own industries?
Yeah, very interesting. And I think I can relate to a lot of the fintech world and innovation world that you're talking about, because I used to work at Citi as well, and this was always a challenge that we would run into, being such a global bank, having all those resources, but still being behind in this financial inclusion and equality sector. We only have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to now take some audience questions. We have a question coming in from our participants. You've alluded to this a little bit, but I would still like to ask you again in case there was anything you wanted to mention. Someone's asking us, how do you interconnect the work in your different roles, if you do at all, given that you have so much on your plate?
Yes. So the answer, I know it's not a yes or no question, but the answer is yes, I do. And I think that for me, it's been always, I mentor a lot of young girls, and something they say to me is, I don't like the job that I'm doing. It's so tough for me. Why can't I feel so inspired the way that you do? And don't get me wrong, not every day do I feel inspired in everything that I do, but I can say that the formula for me has been really deriving different kind of value from everything that I do, because I don't think a singular role that I do could kind of satisfy all the things that I'm looking to do and contribute to, right? So talking to my work about in fintech and in financial services, I'm extremely passionate about it. And I'm looking forward to the impact that, we can make as a global organization, and I can bring as somebody with a non-traditional background in this space. But at the same time, a lot of what I'm passionate about is changing conversations and gender inequality and closing other different gaps that different groups and people have. And so ultimately for me, I couldn't, just do one or the other. And doing nonprofit work, so passionate about it. But at the end of the day, I really want to be on the ground, building the products, running the businesses, investing, and really considering all those things. And so for me, the way I interweave it is I bring different pieces of all the things I'm passionate about into each other, but I also look at each opportunity as a way to expand my value and democratize the things that I'm passionate about in a different way.
Thank you for sharing that. I will take one last question before we close, since we're coming up on time. What was the innovation project, in your opinion, that you think had the largest impact, and in what way? Why would you count that as a larger impact versus others?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I have to say that launching the podcast has been mind-blowing, because like I said, I did it out of a place to solve a problem that I was having. And that was, not knowing what my next job was and coming out of grad school. But in the last week, the podcast has hit 10,000 unique downloads, which is huge considering the fact that we've never advertised, we've never paid anybody. And we've had, we are coming up on season 3, and have had speakers. We have speakers through the end of the year from every Fortune 500 company you can think of, every startup that you've heard of. And I think the reason the impact there has been so huge is because of the conversations and the insights that we've been able to uncover. And the way that the biggest feedback that I've received is that it feels like a coffee chat that you got invited along to, which I think creates free opportunity for anybody to connect with somebody as senior as we have the Chief Innovation Officer of Citi coming on in 2 weeks. And I, like I mentioned, the Chief Innovation Officer at NBA, and we have Natalie Walton, who has created, she's a startup founder and CEO of the app Expectful, which helps women deal with high-risk pregnancies. So to be able to share those conversations and bring these insights globally to now such a large audience has had the greatest impact, and to me has felt super meaningful.
Thank you for sharing that, and congratulations on the success of your podcast. That's very exciting. Thank you again, Zoya. It was super insightful to have you with us today, and we're so glad that you were able to join us. To the audience, thank you for your time. We really appreciate you taking out time and joining us here. If you have any more questions, please feel free to write to us at newyork@impacthub.net. And we will be sure to pass that along to Zoya. And we hope to see you at our next Meet the Innovator series, which will be taking place in just a couple of weeks. Thank you so much, everyone.